Thank you. Thank you, Hannah. Thanks to all of you for coming. The subject before us tonight, Trump, an American tragedy. And our speakers are divided between those who think that should come with a question mark at the end, and those who think a full stop will do just fine. And we have all those views represented tonight. I'm going to get straight onto it by introducing our panel. I'm just going to tell you a word, though, about how we're going to do it. We're going to have a conversation up here and with our guests joining us via video for the first half or so. And then we are going to open it up and take clusters of questions from all of you and bring them back to our panel here. So I'm hoping it's very much a two-way conversation. If it lurches into group therapy, then you'll correct me, I'm sure. So let's get on with introducing our very stellar lineup of speakers, all of whom are highly qualified to talk about this subject and come at it from different angles. So let me begin by introducing on my far right, the Pulitzer Prize-winning historian and regular foreign policy columnist for the Washington Post, Anne Applebaum. You'll know him as a regular commentator on US politics and on world affairs. He served the first President Clinton, turned out to be the only President Clinton, as Assistant Secretary of State for Public Affairs. He was an advisor to the current Clinton campaign. He is Jamie Rubin. On my immediate right here is the former Vice Chairman of Republicans Abroad and Chair of American Voices International. She also worked in the White House under President George W. Bush, as well as on the first gubernatorial campaign of Mitt Romney in Massachusetts, whatever happened to him. She is, and warm welcome please, for Stacey Hilliard. He may be back, they're saying over here. We'll get into that. On my immediate left, a weekly columnist for The Independent, a regular contributor to my own paper, The Guardian, an expert writer on foreign affairs and diplomacy, Mary Dejevsky. And completing our lineup in the flesh, as it were, is the CEO of the Roosevelt Group, who served on the executive board of the World Economic Forum. But crucially for our purposes, he has been tipped in a few places for a role in the incoming administration of Donald Trump. So I'm sure you're going to want to welcome Ted Malloch. And I'm going to say, just introduce our two guests who are joining us by video, and I don't know if we're able to see them straight away, but the first of those is a professor at Columbia University, one of America's leading experts on constitutional law, a lifelong Democrat. He's actually served administrations of both parties and written extensively. He is Philip Bobbitt. Are you seeing him? I think you are. Welcome to Philip. And also coming in and out of view, depending, is the former Director of Strategy for Prime Minister David Cameron, co-founder and CEO of CrowdPack, a Silicon Valley political tech startup, teaches at Stanford, and is the only person I think here who can claim to have inspired his own character on The Thick of It. He is Steve Hilton. May have a few glitches with Philip, but we'll come to him when that's all cleared up. So let's get straight on with it. And the opening area I want to get into is really, we're going to look forward and we're going to focus on what next, but we thought it was a good idea to do just a little bit of explanation of what just happened on November the 8th, what at least a few of our panelists think explains this result, which I think it's fair to say not too many people in any field, not just mine, saw coming. And so why don't we just hear a sort of an opening thesis from you, Stacey Hilliard, on what you think explains this pretty well unexpected victory for Donald Trump on November the 8th?
Well, I'm not sure I would say it was an unexpected victory. I think a lot of people anticipated this.
Did you predict it?
I did predict it, and you can ask my partner. I won 100 pounds off of him because of that.
Should have tweeted.
But I think one of the big reasons that this happened is because Hillary Clinton was the candidate. And I think she was very much a flawed candidate. She was very much the presumptive incumbent in a year that was not a year to be an incumbent. Her message was very much, you had Obama, let's have it again, Obama Mach 2. And that message didn't resonate with people who hadn't had the recovery that they were expecting since 2008. So people were still about $4,000 worse off than they were before the Great Recession happened. People were frustrated. They didn't see that they had benefited from any of the recovery. And I think that was that economic message that Donald Trump said, I'm going to create jobs, is what pushed him forward.
And is it your view that in a way that was always true and baked in early on, and actually all the ups and downs of the campaign, and it was a very dramatic campaign in September, October, November, the debates, the revelations, the tapes, in a way none of that made a difference. The mind was made up because this was a change year.
It was definitely a change year, and I think you saw that with the support that Bernie Sanders had, and particularly the support he had from millennials. And Hillary wasn't able, particularly with millennial women, she wasn't able to get that support that they expected. And they were really looking at what are the policies, and they're voting on policies. And they're saying, I want to be able to pay my student loans off, I want to be able to get a job, I want to be able to advance myself, and they weren't seeing that being possible under her.
So that's the perspective of a Republican who, it's fair to say, was not a Donald Trump supporter early on in the process. What about you, Ted Malloch? Well, we heard the theory there that in a way it's mainly about the deficiencies of Hillary Clinton. Is that your explanation for why Donald Trump won?
Well, it's certainly one of the reasons. I think I take issue at the first with the title of this whole debate, calling it a tragedy.
We got the question mark in there.
Well, I don't think it's a question mark. I don't think in a Shakespearean year either is it a comedy. I think what Trump will prove that this is very much a Republican play. The pendulum has swung. I mean, this is a pendulum year, and it's really an election of realignment. So we've moved from a blue country to a red country, except on the coast. And I think that the social science term to explain all this, Brownstein and others have used it, is class inversion. So what we have is a white middle class that has been largely excluded as a result of globalization and globalism from participation in the economy, and they basically said, like in the movie, we're mad as hell and we're not going to take it anymore.
But Professor Bobbitt, it's great to have you. I don't know how much you heard of what was said before.
I'm afraid I've just come in.
Good. I'm going to assume nothing. We're looking for an explanation for this election, which not many, some, but not many, called right in advance. We've talked about the perceived deficiencies of Hillary Clinton, and maybe that was part of it. And then we've also heard that it was a change year, and in a change year, the pendulum was going to swing away from Democrats towards Republicans. What is your own explanation for why this outcome came about?
Well, it's certainly true that all political societies have more values than they can realize, and so they bring to temporary preeminence one party, and then after 4 or 8 years, they shift gears and bring in another party to support different values. There's a pattern of that. That's partly, I think, an explanation. But I think the broader picture is that this is the change happening all across the industrial and post-industrialized societies. It is a change as the kind of state we have had in the US since the 1860s and Europe since the 1870s has begun to very rapidly decay with the end of the long wars of the 20th century. And the reaction of groups that were linked to that state, industrial groups, national groups, because each of these industrial nation states favored a particular sort of ethnic and political group, that reaction is playing out all across the democracies.
I want to put this to you then, Steve Hilton, if you can hear us.
Yeah.
This is this idea that there was a common pattern here, Brexit, then Trump, the phrase used now, perhaps overused, about those who are left behind, and that this is really about some of those bigger forces that Philip Bobbitt was perhaps describing, and a response to globalization, etc. Just sketch out for us if you think that is what was going on in this election.
I think that's certainly a big part of it, but it's not the only thing. I think that really, I think it's important to look at the election not just in, I know that the theme of most of our discussion is going to be Trump, but I think it's important to look at it in the context of the whole election, because of course the Republicans won not just the presidency, but the Senate and the House and state legislatures across the country and governors' races. It was a really big defeat for Democrats in general, not just Hillary Clinton. And I think that what that tells you is that this was a repudiation, a big repudiation of the Obama years, and I think in two particular ways. And the first is actually beyond just Obama, and that's where I agree about this general point on globalization. I think the economic explanation is pretty fundamental. For me, the most telling statistic, the most telling data point that explains more than anything else about what happened, as Stacey touched on this earlier, is that despite incomes in America happily increasing in the last 12 months, that came out during the campaign in about September. If you look at the long run picture, the median household income in America today is lower than it was in 1999. I think that has two aspects to it. First of all, the straightforward economic one, which is that people, now that's half of American households earning less than before Bush began his presidency and Obama. So they've had 8 years of Bush, 8 years of Obama, and throughout all of that, incomes are down, while the rich have got richer. And I think that explains not just their sense of economic frustration, but political frustration too, because the sense is that it doesn't matter who you vote for. It doesn't matter whether you have Republicans at the White House or Democrats. You know, literally the rich get richer and we get poorer. And so that's what I think explains that sense of desperation. It says, look, we're going to vote for Trump, despite all his obvious flaws as an individual and as a candidate and so on, because they're just looking for something that will change things. But I do think there's one other aspect to this that I think is important to bear in mind, and I think this is probably particularly a US aspect rather than the global one. And that is this very strong sense, I think, on the part of a lot of people of being really not just left behind economically, but really condescended to and spoken down to by the people they perceive to be running the economy and running government. And I think the moment that really crystallized that, and I thought was the moment when I thought that Hillary Clinton was bound to lose, was her speech about the basket of deplorables, where she really revealed the attitude that I think a lot of people in the heartland of America, working people, sense that they are viewed by the coastal elites as being inferior, not culturally up to the mark, and so on. And I think that cultural aspect of it was really important too.
Well, that goes nicely to Anne Applebaum, because you've written some things in these areas and talked about this, that it isn't just about economics, there's a cultural dimension to this.
Yeah, I mean, in something as big as an election like this, it's very hard to pinpoint exactly why everybody voted for what reason. There are many reasons. But I think a lot of the economic explanations have been pretty superficial. If you look at how the voting went, you know, actually the poorest Americans, and this is all across, including in, for example, in Texas, which is a red state, the poorest Americans voted for Hillary Clinton. So we're not talking about exactly, it's not like the poor rose up and overthrew the rich. It's a much more complicated problem. I also think that there's not enough attention has been paid to how Trump ran his campaign and the language that he was using to attract people. He also created a kind of us and them, very much like authoritarian leaders do, we, the real Americans, against the fake Americans. And he created a sense of identity around a group that hadn't, I mean, I suppose it's been appealed to like that before, but not in quite a clear, not quite as aggressive a way. And he appealed to them almost as if he were in the way that, say, you know, a European nationalist appeals to his own nation, the Dutch to Dutch people, you know, we need to be more Dutch. And this was really a very Make America Great Again, has an element of nostalgia to it as well, you know, that it's a kind of bringing back the real America. And I think that at a time when politics are incredibly, seem very distant from people, and they seem very, you know, in a world where you can do all kinds of things very quickly. You know, you can order something online and click a button and get it delivered the next day. And you can like something and feel like you've made a statement. Politics seems very complicated. It takes a long time. Democracy is very boring. It's very frustrating. And Trump seemed to offer some kind of instant solutions in a very classic populist sort of magical thinking. I will fix it. I will make things great again. And he appealed to the cultural identity of a part of America. And I think that was part of why he won.
Just to take further the point you made about European populist figures, some people have said, in response to the kind of argument Steve Hilton was making about economics, they've said, look, don't underestimate the extent to which this was a nativist appeal loaded with racial resentment, because he was saying, and people said, make America great again means make America white again. And there was this element about gender. It was a female candidate. And people have said that, that you cannot exclude that from the picture. Just what do you think on those, the race and the gender?
I very much don't want to say that everybody who voted for Trump is a racist. I'm not saying that. But I think there was an element of, we've had this black president, we have this woman, let's have one of us again. Let's bring back somebody who is familiar, somebody who belongs in the familiar hierarchy. Let's get back to where we were before, and to a lot of people that had a subconscious or conscious appeal. And by the way, you could see it, if he didn't say it exactly, you could absolutely see it on social media. I mean, the racism, the anti-Semitism, and the misogyny of his supporters was something I have never seen before in American politics ever. And there was a lot of it, and it was all the time, and everybody who interacted at all online saw it. And so that can't be eliminated as an issue.
So Ted, we should let you have a response, just on that point.
So there is an alt-left as well as an alt-right, and the political spectrum is a very wide spectrum. It is in the United States, it is in European countries. I think that Trump is really very much a center-right politician, not a far-right politician by any means.
What would he have to do?
He's already bringing people into his administration.
What would he have to do for you to describe him as far-right?
He'd have to prove that he was an authoritarian.
In terms of actions rather than just words.
Exactly.
We're going to get back into all this, I'm sure, but Jamie, let's go to you on what now. In a way, we've talked up to November the 8th. November the 8th to November 30th, we've had 22 days of him being president-elect, Trump. What have we seen? What have we learned? What little clues have we got into
well, first of all, just let me thank you for excusing me from the explanation part of the discussion, because it would be too painful. Look, there's a couple of things that I think you can see already. In the domestic area, we have seen the president-elect suggest in a meeting with the New York Times that maybe his actions on Obamacare won't be so drastic, and then hire as or propose as the Secretary of Health and Human Services the single most opponent of Obamacare. So I think we're seeing that going back and forth, and we'll just have to see how that comes about. I tend to do foreign policy. I'll stick with that, except I can't help but throw in that it looks like Donald Trump will be the least rich member of his cabinet, because he's hired only billionaires for the domestic area. And that's not a comment about what his real wealth is. It's just a comment about how rich these people are.
All of them are working for $1, by the way.
Right. They don't need the money. You're absolutely right. On foreign affairs, where I actually know some of the individuals involved, I don't know whether you call it alt-right or extreme right or way on the right. It would be hard to find two more extreme right-wing people who will spend the most time all day long with Donald Trump, particularly the National Security Advisor, General Flynn, who holds views that were deemed so unusual by the military and the intelligence community that he was essentially pushed out of his job. It ended up being called a management issue when he was the director of the Defense Intelligence Agency, but basically he was so out of sync with the mainstream of the national security bureaucracy.
Oh, he was
not the
fired by
Obama. Let me just have my speak, and you can please jump in. We're talking about an Obama administration where the national security bureaucracy, not the president, the national security bureaucracy asked him to go. The president had nothing to do with it. These were generals. These were the heads of the national intelligence community thought General Flynn was just too aggressive. They had things called Flynn facts, which were wild, unusual things. Today's New York Times gives you an example of where General Flynn believes not only the one you've heard, that radical Islam is the explanation. Islam is more of an explanation than the radicalization of youth. That's the way he would put it, and he's entitled to that view. But he's regarded George Bush as having not sufficiently focused on Islam. General Flynn regards former President Bush as missing the point when he went to a mosque and tried to say that Islam is not the problem, it's a small percentage. Okay. That's not Obama, that's President Bush that he regarded as insufficiently anti-Islamic for him. But the real kicker came out today, which is that General Flynn believes, and I am not exaggerating, that the radical Islamic groups like Al-Qaeda and others are linked up with China and North Korea. And that there is an axis of China, North Korea, and radical Islam that poses a threat to the United States. If you don't believe me, please look at today's New York Times. There's a very clear description of what's in his book, and I urge you to read it if you think I'm exaggerating. So all I would say is that it's very hard to know what Trump's foreign policy is going to be. The only thread that holds it together, the only one I can see, is an extreme approach to the counterterrorism problem by focusing more on the religion than the Obama and Bush administrations did, and roughly the same on the counterterrorism classic approach.
Thank you. We're certainly going to talk about foreign policy more, and we're going to move on to that. Just in terms of these 22 days, what they revealed, the manner, the style, the way the appointments are being made.
One other thing.
Yeah, very briefly. I want to hear from Mary.
This is easy. It's a very unusual time in our lives when the President of the United States goes on his Twitter or whatever, I'm not very good at this, and says that millions of people were fraudulently voted, which is a lie. And then when CNN, and see if you can remember the last time this happened, says that these claims are baseless, he tweets back, "You prove it's not true." When's the last time we heard that?
Ted, do you want to come back on that very quick point, and then we're going to get to Mary? Ted, why don't you just come back just on this point about the tweet about the Trump claiming that millions voted fraudulently?
Well,
just on that.
The source is Clinton News Network, as we call it in the United States, which is a total cooperation with the Democratic Party. So who's to know what to believe? I mean, the fact is, and we'll see this more and more evidence when, not the research is done, but when the empirical evidence is brought forward, that a lot of illegal immigrants voted in this election because they couldn't prove that they had the right to vote or not to vote. I mean, it's an ongoing problem in American politics.
Steve, just because you're there, are you comfortable with this kind of talk? You've been pretty supportive in your public comments of the Trump election. Hearing these claims, millions of fraudulent votes?
No, I'm not. And I have a slightly different take to Jamie, which is that I don't really take it seriously. I think that fundamentally, over the last 18 months, I think we've all understood that there are aspects of Trump's behavior that no one could support, including his supporters. That's not why they voted for him. And so I'm not at all surprised that some aspects of that behavior are continuing, even though others are clearly being moderated. And for me, I'm long past the point of being outraged by or shocked or surprised by anything he does of that kind. And I think the real question is, will he deliver on the core promises he made, particularly of getting growth up, bringing jobs back, raising people's incomes? In the end, that's what he's got to do. And all this other stuff, I think, is, it may be unattractive, it may be disrespectful to the Constitution and so on, but in the end, I think, we're past the point of needing to care about that.
I mean, because the sense I'm getting from a couple of colleagues here is, it was fine to not take him seriously when he wasn't the president-elect of the United States.
That's the point.
He's now the president. He's now about to be the president. So don't you have to start taking it seriously?
No, what you have to take seriously is the real-world problems that he's going to have to deal with, which is falling incomes, low labor participation rates, a terror threat. All of these are real things, and the right way to judge him is how he handles those real things, not whether he's tweeting and having an exchange with CNN.
Okay, we haven't heard yet from Mary Dejewski, and I want to bring you in just on these other things. We heard spiritedly from Jamie about the one particular foreign policy appointment, but lots has happened, Twitter and just the process. Just what light can you shed on that?
Well, I think there's been an enormous amount of criticism, especially in Europe. I mean, I think Europe still has not got Donald Trump, and it probably won't. Maybe for a year, maybe for 8 years we could be looking at it. We just do not get it, and we didn't get it through the campaign. campaign, which is why we actually got it more wrong than even Americans got it. But I agree a lot with what Steve has said, and I think we've got to get used to the idea. This is a president who we may be looking at the future shape of the American presidency, not in terms of Donald Trump's idiosyncrasies, but in terms of a president who speaks direct to the people, who uses the social media, who answers back, who does all sorts of things that used not to be at all acceptable. I mean, in the future, these things may become the norm. Second thing I'd like to say is that looking at the transition, from over here, there's been enormous amounts of criticism saying, oh my goodness, isn't this chaotic? Oh, he doesn't know what he's doing, he doesn't know who to appoint, and all the rest of it. He started incredibly early. The United States has a long transition. This is a luxury compared, especially what the United Kingdom has in terms of forming governments and putting people in power. He has the luxury. He has until January to get his main posts sorted out. I don't think that what we've been looking at chaos. It's been quite a sensible system of interviewing people for the top jobs, which doesn't seem to me to be chaotic or anarchic. That's how it's done.
What about that thing he did when he tweeted saying, I've now worked out who the finalists are and only I know who they are, as if, tune in to tomorrow night's Apprentice to find out.
Well, I'm waiting for British television to show the American Apprentice series in retrospect so that we can see a bit more about what this president looks like and how he behaves. But I think that's a quirk of language, that's a quirk of manner. I don't think this
Yes.
sort of cheapens the presidency.
Good. Let's move into now, imagine it's January the 20th, he will be inaugurated, and look ahead to what kind of policy agenda he will pursue. And we're going to divide this into the domestic area and the foreign policy area. And Stacey Hilliard, why don't you kick us off with what you think he might do and what you think he should do? And I know those are different questions, but what his domestic agenda is likely to consist of?
Well, what he should do and what he might do is he needs to do something that's a bit of a quick win for him, something that he can not only just get through the House and the Senate, but also get a bit of bipartisan support. And one of the things that they're talking a lot about with that is the infrastructure bill, rebuilding our bridges and our roads, which is something that is desperately needed. We've heard that with multiple presidents over the past several cycles, and we haven't really seen that. So that's one of the ways that he's looking at actually growing some jobs and putting some money back into the economy. I think one of the other things that he can do that he's talked about doing, and a lot of pundits have spoken about, is some tax reform. And they think that that's something that can happen quite quickly, flattening the tax code. Our tax code's incredibly complicated, and trying to find a way that we can reduce the number of income tax brackets. So that's one thing that they're looking at. But then the big thing that everybody talks about, and Jamie touched on this already, is Obamacare. And in the past you had heard repeal and replace. Now they're saying repeal and transition. And what they're talking about with that is saying, well, maybe what we'll do is we'll give it a timeline. We'll put an expiry date on it. That at that time, then it falls off the cliff. And so maybe that will force those in the Senate and then to be able to actually put together a package that will pass.
So they're not sure whether they want to trigger Article 50 when it comes to
Exactly.
Obamacare. Philip Bobbitt, why don't we just come to you if you're still able to hear us? I'm just struck by this point about infrastructure spending and roads and highways and bridges. If Philip's there, if he's not, I'll put it to one of our other speakers. But the idea that this would be a big part of Trump's agenda, and I'm just tempted to say that would have been a big part of what President Hillary Clinton would have wanted to do too, and therefore will Democrats in Congress actually end up giving the green light to that because it's something they would have wanted to do anyway? If Philip Bobbitt's there, we'll hear from you. If not, we'll put it to one of the others who are here.
Can I take that if he's not?
He's eager. If you're not there, Philip Bobbitt, we'll put it to Steve, but then
I think the crucial...
But briefly,
I think
though, because we've got people here. Do you want to take that?
Yeah.
Yeah. Steve, briefly, and then we'll come to Jamie. Yeah.
I'll do a very quick response. I think that the crucial difference in how President Clinton would have approached it and how Trump is likely to approach it lies in the funding of it. And that's where you might get a disagreement, even though the aim of investing in infrastructure might be shared. I think the Democratic approach and the Clinton approach would have relied more on public spending as the source of the financing, whereas Trump's approach, in my view, correctly, would identify the source of funding as coming from the private sector, from pension funds and so on, and therefore the revenue that comes from the infrastructure, for example, in the form of tolls, being a crucial part of the mix, not just straightforward public spending to pay for it.
Jamie, so that's one difference.
Well, I'm going to agree with you, except for the part you didn't say who would pay the tolls. I happen to have been a commissioner of the Port Authority in New York, one of these weird jobs that I had very briefly. And what I learned is there's plenty of cash and money to build infrastructure in the United States. There's trillions of available dollars. The problem is no politician wants to ask the people to pay tolls to fund the infrastructure. So in France, you drive down a road and it's beautiful, and then you pay $8.70 after going 3 miles. In the United States, they don't want to ask for tolls. So it's nice that there are suggestions that these private financing will be available. I'm interested to see who the politicians are who are going to ask for the tolls. But what you didn't hear is that the original bill by Donald Trump, as I understand it, was more about tax cuts for programs that were already planned. That it was essentially to take existing infrastructure plans and give a tax break to the people who were going to build it, rather than building more than was planned, which I agree with you would have come from public funds. And that's what the Democrats want to do. But my guess is they will go along. They don't really have much power, and they kind of have to go along because Republicans control the House and the Senate, and it won't take much in the Senate to get a few senators to go along with an infrastructure bill.
My suspicion, Ted Malloch, was that if Hillary Clinton had come forward with these proposals, Congress, Republican-controlled Congress, would have howled and said this is profligate fiscal spending, it's fiscally incontinent, of course you can't do it, and the same package of proposals will be put to them by Donald Trump, and they'll say this is wonderful, this is going to make America great again.
There won't be the same proposals, as Steve has outlined. The entire infrastructure package, which will be $1 trillion package, will be largely private funding. And that is being toyed with right now by people who will be going into Treasury Secretary, and it'll be an altogether different proposal. Package. But Chuck Schumer has already come out and said...
He's the Democratic leader in the Senate.
He's the Democratic leader in the Senate, and he's from New York, and he's worked with Trump before. He's already come out and said, let's get something done. We need this. Let's prime the economy. We can go on this. I think it's a given.
One big obvious difference, infrastructure project, is the wall that he promises to build. He always said Mexico was going to pay for it. I'm tempted to say, how's that working out? But just tell us about that as an infrastructure project. Is he serious about that?
I think he's deadly serious about it. I think there'll be a shovel in the ground. What you might not realize is there's already a wall in Southern California that extends for many miles, and it will be extended. The entire thing will not be a physical wall. I wrote about this at length. And I think part of the wall will be electronic, part of the wall might indeed be a fence, but there will be an infrastructure project on the wall with our southern border, because you can't have a country that doesn't respect its own national sovereignty.
Stacey, do you just want to comment on the wall point?
Well, I've actually kind of said all along that he's not going to build this actual wall across the entire border.
Do you think his supporters who voted for him knew that?
Well, I'm from Texas, and I think we knew that you're not going to build a wall. We have a nice, beautiful river as a natural border there. And I think that people see that that is actually addressing the issue of the pressures that illegal immigration put on. And coming from a border state, we see that all the time, the pressures it puts on the border towns, how it decimates education systems, the healthcare systems, and that has to be funded by somebody. And it has to be tax dollars, and it's usually from the states that that's being funded. And it's causing a lot of problems that when we have the immigration debate, we have two debates. We have an illegal immigration debate and a legal debate. And I think that people often mix the two and assume that if we're talking about immigration, then we don't want people coming over and actually taking any jobs such as in high tech, or if they're programmers, and as opposed to the illegal and immigration debate, which I think is something that a lot of people focus
on.
on.
I want to bring you in, but one question, I know you've got something you want to say yourself, but one thing I want to ask is, Ted Malloch referred to Chuck Schumer, the Democrat, who's tempted to say, okay, let's do something here. And I'm just wondering whether you think Democrats should do that, thereby handing Donald Trump a tangible victory that he can say, look, I've achieved things, or should they take a leaf out of the Republican book in 2010, 2011, when Republicans said, we're just not going to give this guy anything, Obama, we're going to sabotage his presidency.
So first of all, don't ask me, I'm not a registered Democrat.
I know you're not. I'm just interested what your analytical view of that question is.
No, so I mean, I think it's very interesting. Absolutely, one of the ideas after 2008 that Obama had was let's do a big, huge infrastructure investment.
Green technology.
Green technology, rebuild the trains, let's do a whole, and he was blocked again and again and again and again by Republican Congresses. So for me, it's just ironic that that now Trump wants to do exactly the same thing. And I don't really have a view about what Democrats should do. I think they should, make their decision based on what the law says and how effective they think it was going to be. I just wanted to say something about the wall. I think the wall was, to refer to what I was saying earlier, I don't think it matters whether the wall is real or not. The wall was a metaphor. The wall was, let's keep people out. Let's make America great again. Let's protect what we have. It was an image that appealed to crowds. Remember, he would shout, build the wall, and people would applaud. And I don't think it really, as you say, something like a third of the border is already covered by either a wall or a fence. And actually, the illegal immigration problem in the United States is not really about people crossing the border. It's more about people flying in and overstaying visas. That's actually the main source of illegal immigration. So the wall is it's a completely phony, it's not a real problem. It's a phony, it's an image, it's a thing we need to conjure up, to help create this kind of tribal identity that he was trying to create during the election campaign.
In New Hampshire and in Ohio, and they didn't think he was promising to build a big, beautiful metaphor. They thought he was building a wall, and that's what they wanted to see.
I mean, okay, but why were they applauding it? I mean, particularly people in New Hampshire. Why do people in New Hampshire care about the wall? Really, it's really, they should be worried about Canada. That's the real threat to them. I mean,
do you want to comment just quickly on this, Jim?
The wall, no, I'll leave that.
Let's get on to...
It was a good song, yeah?
There is a good song. Let's get on to foreign policy. I know we're rattling through here, but let's talk about that because there's a lot there to say. There's a specific argument to be had, and we're going to have it about Russia and Vladimir Putin. But, Jamie, can you just give us a little tour d'horizon of what we know of what Donald Trump's intentions are with the world, perhaps outside Russia, because we do want to hear Mary and Anne on that. But the Middle East, on China, he talked about China a lot. Just give us a sense of what you think the Trump doctrine might actually be.
Well, as I said, I think that the theme, to the extent you can find a thread in the statements and the policy choices that have been focused on, or the personnel, is a more aggressive stance on the religious background of terrorists and the immigration link. Even today, the Somali from Ohio State, the president-elect, and I'm sorry, unlike some other people in this room, I actually take it seriously when the president-elect speaks to the public. President Obama tweeted and used social media for 8 years. There's nothing new about this. The question is, what does he say? What are the words that are chosen? And I, having worked for a president, I took the words pretty seriously. And so when a president speaks, I take it seriously. Maybe that's a mistake. Maybe I should be in the metaphor business. But what he said today is that the Somali didn't belong in the United States. I don't think we know whether he was born here or whether he was an immigrant yet or whether his parents were born here. I don't know the answer to that.
Just read the New York Times.
Well, so then you read the New York Times. I hope you get all your facts there rather than some of the other places. In any event, the point is that will be a theme. That will be a focus of the administration. On China, we'll see if he starts a trade war. The president has the power to start a trade war. It won't be a congressional thing. It'll be a presidential thing. I think that would be an extremely ill-advised thing to do, but it's something he promised.
On that, we haven't seen one of those in that recently.
Right.
Do trade wars become shooting wars?
Well, I would say it a different way. The fact that the United States and China have found a way to manage their adversarial relationship is partly a function of increased trade relations, deeming it less in people's interest to start a shooting war in the South China Sea, where the current Chinese president has taken a very aggressive stance, and we'll just have to see what happens. But I do need to veer into the Russia subject, because it is the dominating subject of the Trump foreign policy, of the European foreign policy. We're about to have a French president. It's either going to be the Fillon or Marie Le Pen, who is literally regarding Vladimir Putin as a friend-to-be. Sanctions should be lifted, despite what's gone on in Syria, despite the fact that Vladimir Putin reached deep inside the American political system and risked, this is the point, not what he did, that he would risk a conflict with the United States by digging deep into our system, and that comes after a big country invaded a small country.
Just to explain to people here, you're talking about the
I'm
hacking,
talking about the hacking
WikiLeaks.
and WikiLeaks. And so for those of you who are Republicans who used to believe, and particularly a Mitt Romney former associate, Mitt Romney regarded and turned out to be right,
yes,
that Russia was the biggest threat we faced in 2012. Well, I think we face it, and what's worse is that we're not going to have, those of us who are concerned about a Russia, now remember what we're talking about here. We're talking about a president who invited into his office Bashar Assad, who has been working with Iran, working with Hezbollah, and has been responsible for the mass murder of hundreds of thousands of people. And Vladimir Putin was happy to invite him in, declare him his friend after those mass murders, and come in and help him win, and he's about to win. And that came after Mr. Putin arranged for the invasion of a European country and the annexation of a piece of that European country. Now, we're here in London, and the idea that people are not more outraged by this, the idea that people are shrugging their shoulders about Vladimir Putin's invasion of another country, which now Donald Trump, for whatever reason, and we can speculate about it, believes that working with Putin is a great thing and that sanctions should be lifted, and his people removed the support for Ukrainian defense forces in the platform. There is going to be a sea change in the West relationship with Russia, and I would argue, and maybe I'll be all wrong, and I'll be happy to be shown to be wrong, that 4 years from now, there are going to be a lot of unhappy people that we got into bed with such a pernicious Russian leader.
Okay, thank you. I just want to see if I can see Philip Bobbitt there, and I just want to see if Philip can hear us. Philip, you seem as if you can hear us in the little image I've got there. Is Philip Bobbitt there?
Poor Philip.
It's excluded.
He's talking, and I can see him on a little thumbnail screen. But while we're going to still try and
He's a metaphor, right?
we're still going to try and get contact with him in reality, not just metaphorically. But you've heard a very trenchant presentation of the case there from Jamie Rubin, Mary Dejevsky on Russia and Trump.
Well, I hope I can make an equally trenchant case in completely the opposite direction. Jamie talked about there being, over the next 4 years, a sea change in relations with Russia, between the US and Russia, between the West and Russia generally. And I would applaud that. I would say there could be nothing better than a sea change in Western relations with Russia, led by the United States. If it's under Donald Trump, so be it. There were a lot of things that were said completely wrongly and misleadingly during the campaign. One of them was, as Jamie went into enormous detail, about the cyber hacking of the Democrats. This was never, ever, ever proved beyond all reasonable doubt to have come from the Russians. First. Second, do you not believe that everybody who has the capability to hack other people is hacking absolutely as much as they can by cyber or any other way through other people,
not the hacking, it was
other people's election campaigns? People want the intelligence. They're going to try and get it by any means. It's not, if Russia is doing it, it's not alone doing it, it's not alone having the capability. That's the first thing.
Can you think of another example recently? I know the United States does have a record.
But make sure
Hold on. I'm talking about Ravin. We know Russia, the United States has a record in intervening in other elections. But can you think of a recent example where they have hacked into the databases of Democratic parties and published the hacked contents? Is there another thing comparable to what WikiLeaks did in this
by the way,
election?
Russia has done before several times.
Let's just hear.
Well, I mean, I don't know that there needs to be a precedent, because...
But you just said others are doing it.
Yeah, no, what I'm arguing is that other people are going to be trying to find intelligence on other people's election campaigns, especially where those campaigns are so closely fought as the one in the United States, and where the outcome is so important for everybody around the world. Obviously, everybody is going to be hacking. If they then choose to publish it, well, you know, why not? I mean, that doesn't seem to me to be any different order of interfering in, this is not interfering in other people's elections. It's trying to figure out what is going on. We've seen in the past, we've seen the Americans and Western countries generally interfering in elections in formerly Eastern Bloc countries,
like
including Ukraine and including Georgia, where we send envoys and we have NGOs working on the side of opposition politicians. Now, that is absolutely fine, but you can't say it's fine for us to be doing that, and it's not fine for other people that we maybe don't see eye to eye with to be doing that. That is a complete double standard.
Okay.
But I mean,
do you want to have one more?
Yeah,
I
want to have
and
one
then I'll get to
more.
Anne next, not you, Jamie, because we need to hear from Anne.
About the idea that people take a very dim view of the idea that Donald Trump could restart relations with Russia. And he's, I think, been misleadingly presented as admiring Putin, thinking Putin's a jolly good thing, thinking Russia is a wonderful place. He does not say that. He said that he admired Putin as a national leader who stood up for his country and represented the national interest. And he was saying that to contrast him for electoral reasons with President Obama. You know, right or wrong, that is the context in which he said it. And I think that Putin and Trump, who says he says that he thinks he can do business with Putin, that is exactly what an American president ought to be setting out to do.
Depends what he means by business, I suppose. But let's hear from Anne Appleman.
I mean, I hardly know where to begin. I mean, first of all, the pattern of Russian interference in the American election is one that is very familiar to me. I've watched elections in Ukraine, in Poland, in other parts of Central Europe where there's been very open, very clear. It wasn't always hacked material. Sometimes it was tapes. Sometimes it was other things where there have been Russian Secret Service interventions in election campaigns. And so this is absolutely fit into a pattern that was recognizable. It's not something the United States does. I'm not aware of any similar American involvement at all, or really anybody else. And I also don't believe that the...
Do you want to just come back on that, Mary? Because Mary was laughing at it.
Wait, Mary, a second ago you were asked exactly this question, and you couldn't answer it. Have you thought of an answer now?
No, I was told that there was a distinction between publishing the findings and not publishing the findings. My argument was that everybody is doing this.
No, Mary, I'm not talking about hacking. I'm talking about intervening in an election campaign using targeted hacked material in order to do that.
That is not what Russia was doing in this election.
No?
Russia did not interfere in the American election.
Are you sure?
Can anybody be sure that anybody doesn't interfere in anybody else's election?
Let's move on. The point about Trump is that, and I actually think the most important point about him is really not the point about Russia. He has been a long-time admirer of Putin. He's repeatedly said he admires him, going back many, many years, not just in the last 2 years. Following the invasion of Ukraine in 2014, he said it complimented him for doing this on television. I've seen the clip of it. It exists. You can go and find it. So let's just put that to one side. The more important point about Trump is what kind of a leader of the Western alliance is he going to be? This is somebody who, since the first time I know of him doing it, maybe he did it before, was in 2000, he began denigrating and undermining the NATO alliance. And not just because it's, he often speaks about being very expensive, but he's gone quite a bit farther than that in some of his statements. It's not just that he wants NATO members to pay up. He has said, why should we be involved in European wars? What is our interest there? He's been very clear that he's not interested. He has no emotional or political or moral sense of attachment to Europe. And he said, by the way, the same thing about Japan and South Korea. I just spoke this afternoon to a Japanese journalist who says, there's an enormous amount of concern in Japan because America is its only security umbrella. Is this going to continue? We don't know. The signals have been very mixed and very complicated. So what my concern about Trump is that he doesn't see himself, he doesn't see himself as a leader of a group of democratic countries, and he doesn't seem to understand the benefit of alliances. You know, that the United States benefits not just, it's not just the US spending money to put troops places, it's also the leader of a of a group of countries which have created a political and legal trade and economic and political order which has been hugely beneficial to the United States, to this country, and to all of Europe. And he doesn't believe in that, and he doesn't care about it.
Good. Moment to go. Thank you. Okay. My fingers are crossed as I ask if Philip Bobbitt can hear us. I'm looking confidently.
Yes, I can hear you.
Excellent. And we can hear you. So a round of applause. I just want you to pick up, because you're somebody who served administrations of both parties, just pick up that question that Anne Applebaum ended there with, which is what kind of Western alliance would he lead? How would he lead the Western alliance? And just your perspective on that.
I think the answer is we don't know. We don't really know what sort of alliance leader he would be. All the reservations that Anne expressed, I have. I would have thought that in the campaign, the highest priority of someone running for president would be to increase the expectation of solidarity across the alliance. Trump didn't do that. Indeed, as Anne suggested, he did just the opposite. But whether this will persist as a policy, I don't think we really know.
Thank you. We're going. Stacey's a quick word from Stacey Hilliard, then we're going to the audience.
Can I jump in on the Russia thing as well, just for a second, after Stacey?
Well, I'm keen to get the audience in, Steve. So what we'll do is we'll get the audience, and then I'll come back to you and make sure you get a say on that.
I was just going to say very quickly on the NATO issue. I've spoken with one of the advisors that's been talking to him about NATO, and what they've really spoken about is reform of NATO. This is something that even everybody within the alliance has been speaking about for several years. But they've said, you know, the remit of the NATO alliances is a peacekeeping force, and so if we're going to be having a war force, then we need to look at maybe possible two different strains to that. And so I think that what you would see is moving forward in the policies with that is how is it going to perform, what's it going to look like, is it going to stay as one entity, or is it going to have a separate one attached to it?
Thank you. Lots there for us to bite on. Let's take some questions. I'm going to bring them back here to this panel. People with microphones, do you have somebody there already? So we'll go with that first, hold on. And I want to make sure the microphone's here second. As you know, I always insist on a gender balance. I would quite like if we had one of our female questioners. There we are. I haven't got the Trump memo yet, so I take women seriously and make sure we hear from them. So let's hear from the question number one. Yeah.
So a very quick question regarding the Supreme Court, which hasn't come up yet. Who and what kind of justice do the panel expect to replace Scalia? And also, a second side point, is this the first campaign when we've all wanted the winning candidate to break all his election promises?
Good, thank you. There's somebody here, I hope. Yep.
Hi, I'm Jamie from Vanity Fair. Our Vanity Fair fans have been following the event closely on Twitter, and they've been submitting their questions. The following question was submitted by Olivia Rutter, and she asked, how long will it take society to undo the ills that Trump has already committed? Thank you.
Did she say what those ills are? No, so we can fill in the blank. Let's hear gentleman here with the red sweater on, and then we'll ask him to pass the microphone to you. Yeah.
Shouldn't Europe pay its way in NATO?
Okay. Applause for that. And could you pass the microphone just along to the lady there? Yeah, yes. Very keen. Yeah.
I think we cannot hide from the R word in this election, because it was the white vote that got Trump in, and I'm surprised that not a single Hispanic speaker in the group. So I have a question about that, and it's what are the Trump supporters going to do when the extreme right, who is racist and xenophobic, not as the extreme left, are attacking people for being foreigners? Are all you Trump supporters who claim not to be racist going to do something about it, or are you going to keep your hands crossed? And the other question, other thing is...
That's enough, I think, don't you?
Climate change.
Okay, climate change. I'll make sure we talk about it. Thank you, though. I'm just trying to move things along. Somebody's waving at me frantically over here. Yes, this will be the last one in this round. I'm going to take others, don't worry, and people up there. Yeah.
Hi, I'm Mexican. I don't have horns. I did not come here illegally. but I do have a very large Trump piñata at home. And I want to share with you what happened to my 7-year-old son at one of London's top schools, if I should say that. He's 7 years old, and one of his classmates told him very recently, I am a Trump supporter. All Mexicans are terrorists except for you. So I think, you know, he mixed metaphors, whatever offense, but I think the point here is that whether or not we have the luxury of taking Trump seriously, we cannot sidestep the fact that he won this election by mobilizing people around dehumanizing others. And I think, yes, and I want to ask, is this the world that we want our children to grow up in? And I do put that question to the Trump supporters. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, well, those two last questions, I'm going to come around, don't worry. We're going to do another round. Those two last questions, I think, do belong together. And why don't we put them straight to you, Ted Malloch? The questioner suggests that Trump won, even if it wasn't in his program, he won by mobilizing some of this racially charged hostility. And again, the lady here said, what are Trump supporters going to do with the fact that that was a big part of his support?
So I was on CNN, a month or so before the election on Becky Anderson's show, and she asked me the question in all seriousness, don't you think the rest of the world should vote for the American president? And I looked at her, and I read back her question to her. Does it make any sense at all that the rest of the world would vote in the American election? So the Americans have voted. They've made their decision. I mean, they've won through the Electoral College.
That's not addressing this question. This question was not about whether the rest of the world should have a vote. The question was, and racist feeling was mobilized, said the questioner, in this election victory. What do Trump supporters do with the fact, as they argue, that a lot of this racial resentment was stirred and played a part in Trump's victory? Is there a job of sort of repairing to be done as a result of it?
I think that you do need, as he said in his Victory Night speech, to bring the country together, to heal the divides, to go forward, to bring diversity into the cabinet and into the government. I mean, I guess in partial answer, the oddity might be that a higher percentage of Mexicans and blacks voted for Donald Trump than voted for Romney or McCain.
Yeah, 29% of Latino voters did vote for Donald Trump.
Those were the illegal voters, yeah? I mean, those were the...
She's joking.
If they showed their cards.
Steve, I just want to call up Steve Hilton, if I can, taking the risk of losing the line to Philip Bobbitt, I hope not. But Steve, climate change came up here. It didn't come up in the 4.5 hours of televised debates. But you famously advised David Cameron when he was in his vote blue, go green period. You took climate change seriously. The candidate you've been advocating for says that climate change is a hoax perpetrated by the Chinese. And I wonder how you square that with your earlier advocacy of a position on climate change.
The simple answer is that I've never equated being green with climate change. And so the action that I argued very strongly for in the period running up to the 2010 election and subsequently was actually not focused mainly on climate change, but more on conservation and the alarm that we should have over species loss and biodiversity and so on. I think that what's the problem with climate change, and the reason that actually, despite the, I'd use the word obsession with climate change in certain parts of the left in America, is that actually it's an agenda that's been captured by big business. It's not really about being green or environmental at all. Actually, what it's really about now is taxpayer subsidy to big businesses to support a particular economic response. It's not really about being green at all. So I've never seen being green as the same as taking climate change seriously. I'm actually more of a skeptic than many people assumed from my advocacy of the green agenda.
Okay, thank you. Stacey Hilliard, I want you to take up the very first question about who you expect, or perhaps who you think should be nominated to this vacant seat on the Supreme Court. Tremendously important for American law and culture, etc., those decisions that a judge can make. And perhaps you want to address, I think, this point about race that's come up.
Yeah, I think just on the Supreme Court, the type of justices that we're looking at are somebody who's going to be more of a constitutionalist. That's what you've kind of heard him talking about. You have heard Trump talk about he would appoint pro-life justices, and I know this has sent shivers down a lot of people's spines. But if you look at people like Ted Cruz, who will not be appointed to the Supreme Court, and he specifically said that just the other day to somebody, but saying that...
Encouraging.
Well, maybe for you. But I think it's people who respect the law, and the law is the law, and that they will look at it that way. They're not going to go out and seek to overturn anything. But people who will actually be seen as a strict constitutionalist is the type of justices that he'll be looking at. But I do want to just... Well, I hope so. And I disagree with that. And I think that's horrendous.
Because I'm not sure everyone heard it. Why don't we bring the microphone to the rather well-known questioner,
well,
whose voice will be familiar?
I'm really sorry, but I'm a bit of a busybody. I've just come from my show. I'm very, adrenalined up, and I'm listening to this conversation. I think several things have to be made clear. One, we clearly live in a post-truth society. The idea that green is not the same as climate change and conversation is bananas. The idea that Vladimir Putin somehow is the great defender of all the values that we believe in. I mean, has anybody asked what Vladimir Putin has done in Syria, Mary? Really? Honestly? Seriously? Is that the kind of world that we want? Look at Syria right now.
Can I just address that? I just want to address that.
One more, and then we're going to bring it back.
The First Amendment of the United States, you say a strict constitutionalist, right? I'm a journalist. I believe in free speech. It's my guaranteed right as a journalist working for an American society. The President of the United States, elect, made his first tweet threatening the media, talking about inciting protests. That's the first one. And then he's just come out and talked about protests and flag burning. So which part of the Constitution? These are legitimate questions.
It's his freedom of speech to say those things as well. And I think that I totally disagree with him about the flag burning comment that he made, and he's received a lot of criticism about that. But as far as the issue with Syria...
Just to bring people up to speed, this was a tweet in which he said people
there
who
was
burn
an
the
issue. Yes, there was an issue with a university in New Hampshire, I believe, that the flag was taken down to half-mast after the election, and people were protesting, and somebody pulled it down and burnt it, and it was being covered, and he tweeted.
And he said those people should perhaps lose their citizenship.
Well, actually, Hillary Clinton was, I believe, a signatory to a bill, the flag burning, bill that gave a $100,000 fine and a year in prison.
I know we've steered you off. You wanted to make a quick point about the race claim that was made, and I just want to hear your response to that. There's another well-known Trump supporter here. I also want to put it to him. So let's just get back onto the questions.
Yeah, I think it's really important to address this race issue, but this is something that has been boiling for the last 8 years. I've seen the divisions happening in our society that we haven't had in the past. And I think as far as with the election, as far as everybody saying, well, it was only the whites who came out and it was a white supremacist movement that came and voted Trump in, that's incorrect. What voted Trump in was Obama voters who voted for him in 2008 and 2012 in Michigan and Pennsylvania. Hillary Clinton was unable to motivate those voters and get them out to the polls. Okay. So, but I think it's important to address the race issue because one of the things that we do need is leadership. And we haven't had that over the 8 years. We've had the president coming out and actually placing blame instead of actually being a leader and saying, let's pull people together to talk about this. But somebody who has led on it is Nikki Haley, who's now appointed as his UN ambassador, who, when there was the shooting in the South Carolina church, she was actually able to bring her communities together, and they didn't have rioting like they did in the other places, like in Missouri.
Were you just saying a minute ago that you thought Barack Obama didn't try to bring people together, but instead assigned blame?
I think he did, because when he came out, he would automatically place blame onto the police officers, or he would automatically sympathize with well, he did. You can look at his comments. But as the President of the United States, he should actually be saying, we clearly have a problem. And so what we need to do is bring the leaders of our communities together. And I, as the President of the United States, need to sit everybody down and come up with a solution and find out why this is happening. Nobody has asked the why question. Nobody has said, what's the root cause of this?
Okay, there's so much ground to cover. I recognise, since we've had Christian Amanpour from CNN, Charlie Wolf, who's a regular broadcaster on American TV networks and has been a supporter of Donald Trump. Just tell us how you deal with this thing that people said here, which is Trump supporters need to acknowledge the fact that some of the mobilizing energy in this campaign was hostile to different racial minorities, and you know that the Ku Klux Klan and David Duke endorsed and were very warm in their endorsement of Donald Trump. You, as somebody who backs Donald Trump, how do you deal with that? Well, Charlie Wolf.
It was said when Reagan was backed by someone who was one of these white supremacist groups at the time, Reagan said, well, actually, he's endorsing my plan, not I'm endorsing his plan. And that's how I think it was the other day with the chap in Washington, D.C. was endorsing Trump and Trump's plan. So Trump isn't endorsing his. I think most Americans, the vast majority of Americans, take race relations very seriously. And it has disturbed me that in the last 8 years, we have seen this sort of split between the black and the white communities, and it's under a black president. And I don't fully know why. I don't know why groups like Black Lives Matter have been invited to the White House that have only caused problems to the black community, not helped them at all. And yes, unfortunately, Mr. Obama has made many times has opened his mouth before the brain was engaged in putting forward things that weren't true, Professor Gates being one. I have a son, if I had a son, he'd look like Trayvon, getting involved in things where he shouldn't have been. And I would also point out...
Sorry, Charlie, how is that racially divisive to say, if I had a son, he would have looked like Trayvon Martin?
Because he was taking a side between the police and the event before we knew what was going on. That was the problem there. He's... It has nothing to no.
All right, complete your point, Charlie. Then I want to.
I just wanted one important point I wanted to put towards Jamie. He gave a very good explanation of Syria and what's going on there. But let me ask, who was the president? It hasn't been Donald Trump. It's been Mr. Obama, and it's Mr. Obama who set a red line that he didn't back up. Now I think with Mr. Trump at least respects power, and I think people of power respect power back. I see someone like Trump able to negotiate better than Mr. Obama will, because unlike a senator who will just lie down like he did for Iran, Trump will expect something in return. And I think that's one of the reasons why I have more faith in him than I do Mr. Obama.
Okay, the second half of the Amanpour-Rubin tag team is keen to break in here. So very briefly, and then I want to put some to Anna.
Very briefly, you are correct. President Obama's decision not to follow through on the red line is part of the reason that Syria has collapsed into the situation it's in, okay? That's true. I don't think you can dispute that. But that's a failure to act. What we're talking about here, and the reason why I'm so, and you can see I'm not the only one, concerned about Mr. Putin, is because he has acted. He has returned Russia to the Middle East where they've never been for the last, 30 years. And he's been responsible to have their airplanes working with the Syrian airplanes to bomb civilians and destroy them. And the president-elect has not found it in his interest to even mention that, and has frankly said that he thinks Putin is doing a pretty good job in Syria when Mr. Putin hasn't struck ISIS. There's this big myth that the Russians are in Syria for ISIS, and that's what President-elect Trump has blessed. But all they've really done is destroy the opposition, which is why Aleppo will fall in the next couple of days, and Mr. Assad responsible for mass murder. We're talking about intelligence agencies recording the names of the victims and taking pictures of each one so they can get credit for killing 50,000, not just 45,000. That's the society that Mr. Putin wants to bless and see victorious, along with the Iranian leadership, along with Hezbollah, and that's who Mr. Trump wants to work closely with without referring to all those things. That's my problem. We all want to deal with the Russians. But if you're going to forget their invasion of Ukraine, if you're going to forget what they did in Syria, if you're going to forget their interference, and no one has ever done it where they've published the information, okay? There's a big difference. The NGOs in Georgia are openly supporting democracy. There's no hidden secret plan to remove information and publish it. That's the difference.
How did President Obama stand up to this evil tyrant,
Not
Mr.
very
Putin?
well. Not
Thank
very
you.
well. Okay,
Thank you.
but Mr. Obama at least had the dignity to say that
Please
big
don't.
countries don't invade small countries and impose sanctions. And Mr. Trump wants to lift them. That's my problem.
Okay, let's hear from Mary. There are so many questions that are addressed to you, so I'm just going to scoop up one last little more, and then it's coming to you. But Anne Applebaum, the question was put, shouldn't Europe pay its way in NATO?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I am very much in favor of a reinvigoration of NATO. I think that I'm in favor of, by the way, I'm very much in favor of an EU contribution to NATO. I want Europe to be aware of what's happening not only on its borders, but
So
inside its own country. But that is not what Trump has said. That is not the end of what he said. His criticism of the alliance is much deeper. It's a trading relationship. It's, we'll help them if they do X or Y for us. We don't really need to be involved in these wars. He has never said anything that I have been able to find or that I have heard which indicates any sense of responsibility for this international system that has been created, that has served America and that has served Europe and has served others over the last 50 years since the war. He has no interest in it. He's willing to destroy it. He's not bothered by it. So absolutely we should reinforce NATO.
Philip Bobbitt, go on. Let's hear from you.
Just one point on this subject. It's true that the conventional forces of NATO are a crucial part of our cooperation, and it's also true the Europeans don't do enough. But the most vital link is the nuclear link to the United States deterrent. It is extended deterrence, not our conventional forces, that prevented Europe from being taken over for decades, and that also, by the way, prevented other powers from acquiring their own nuclear weapons because they could rely on us. Now, whatever Donald Trump may or may not feel about the contributions to the budgets of these various members, if he calls into question American nuclear deterrence for the members of NATO, then I think he has shattered the alliance.
And he has called into question nuclear deterrence in Asia.
All right, it's time for Mary Dziuszewski to come back on so many of these points.
I'd just briefly like to address the NATO question, because I think I'm probably not such a gigantic fan of NATO as either Anne Applebaum or Philip Bobbitt, because I tend to think that its usefulness really expired at the end of the Cold War, and that its continued existence is one of the biggest sources of insecurity across Europe today. And I think that Donald Trump is he has a degree of right on his side in at least questioning it. And I also think that, yes, if there's going to be a more transactional attitude from the United States to European defense, then this is the opportunity that Europe has been looking for and has either copped out of or has been discouraged from by previous American administrations to organize its own defense. And I think one of the tragedies here is that with Brexit, that Britain will be leaving the European Union, and so the prospect of a coordinated, strong European defense is actually less than it would have been before. So that's the NATO question. Now, as Anne said,
I agree with that.
Okay. I don't know where to begin on the other question. Certainly,
as briefly as you can, because we do want to get other people.
Two points.
Yeah.
On the question of Trump being an admirer of Putin's values, post-Soviet Russia, that is absolutely not true. When Trump has talked about Russia, he has actually disclaimed any admiration, either for values or for how Russian society is organized. What he says is very similar, actually, to what Margaret Thatcher said about Gorbachev. This is a man I can do business with. Following up, we disagree fundamentally on many issues, is what Margaret Thatcher said. Nonetheless, I think that we can do business. And she was vindicated, and I think that Trump may also be vindicated in the same way.
But you would put Putin in a different category morally than Gorbachev, wouldn't you?
In the sense of inferior or superior?
Well, maybe you've answered my question. Maybe you've answered my question. Did you have one more thing you were going to say?
Yes.
A bit brief as you can, and then we must go to more people here.
I wanted to talk about Syria. because I think the idea that, that Obama didn't apparently honour his red line over use of chemical weapons in Syria, that is a complete misinterpretation, misconception. Obama explained a lot of it in his Atlantic magazine interview, where he said that there were times when it was wiser not to do things and more difficult not to do things than actually to do them. And I think that if you'd seen the United States intervening in Syria in that active way then, you could be an even worse mess than we're in at the moment.
Okay,
No, I'd like to say that Russia is actually, we may like it, we may not like it, Russia is the only outside interventionist in Syria which is there legally, according to the United Nations, because it was invited in by Assad, its ally. Now, as I say, you may like it, you may not like it. And I would also ask the question, do you think it's more humanitarian for the West to be arming and training rebels who have no hope of winning and prolonging the conflict over Aleppo, prolonging the number of casualties? Or is it actually more humane to let somebody win and have talks and have a bargaining session about a post-war settlement in Syria?
Okay,
I asked that
must
question.
stop there. What I'm going to say generally is that we are here to focus on Trump. We've got into a very big discussion about Russia and Syria, which I understand, given the position, but let's try and focus back on our title, Trump Tragedy. Microphone number 4, that you've got a question there, and we're going to try and get voices from all around the room, and then we'll go to number 3. But
hi, I'm Benedict. I'm also a busybody, and I've just come from watching Christiane's show. For those on the panel that support Trump, can we all in this room have a pledge that you'll be back here in 4 and again in 8 years defending the history of President Trump, please?
Okay. Over there, microphone number 3, and if we could have a microphone over here, because there's a couple of people who are very eager. Yeah, number 3.
A question mainly to Steve. You made a comment that intrigued me. How can you call his hate speech on Twitter not a real problem when it's normalized hate speech and led people, some people, I'm not saying all of his supporters, but to think that hatred is normal and it has led to people, fearing for their security, safety, and it has led to attacks? Thank you.
Okay. Have we got a microphone over here? There's a lady who had her hand up here, and then we'll go to the gentleman. Lady first. Yeah.
Good evening. This question is for the panel, but also for Philip Bobbitt. I'd like to ask how the business interests of Trump are in direct conflict with the Constitution of the United States, and how this impacts the vote of the Electoral College.
Ah, interesting. And Philip Bobbitt, of course, an expert on constitutional law, so we'll put that in. And the gentleman in front who waited patiently, yeah?
Thank you. Mr. Rubin, I'd like to ask you, how can you mention Donald Trump thinking of removing sanctions when Obama, $150 billion to the #1 purveyor of terrorism in the world? It's ridiculous. You should be ashamed of mentioning that.
Are you mentioning Iran there? Is that what
yes, of course.
You didn't say it, so I'm just
We saw the money. We saw the plane. We saw the hostages. Okay. There's nobody here who didn't see that. Did everybody see that? Second, Ms. Applebaum. Every single... The question is, how can he possibly talk about it when there's $150 billion going to Iran?
Go to your
Second question, Ms. Applebaum. Every single one of the illegal immigrants is illegal. The job of the President of the United States is to keep the law, period. Try and explain that in 3.
Okay.
The question is just, it's very short. The question is,
I want to go to the lady there with a microphone. The lady there with a hand up, if you can stand up. No, we got enough. Go on. We got 2 is enough. Let's hear from the lady there. If you can see me, you need to keep your hand up, otherwise they don't know it's you. There we are. Keep your hand up. Yeah. And you're going to be the last one in this round.
Hello?
I'm so sorry for people who didn't manage to get a go. Yeah.
Yeah, this is for Anne and Jamie and Jonathan, for yourself.
Where did that have come from? It's a completely different person.
Hello?
Okay, you weren't the person I had in mind, but nevertheless, okay, we'll hear from you and then we'll hear from you. Yeah.
Given that there's so much dissension amongst the panel about what's truth and what isn't coming out of Donald Trump's mouth, in terms of journalists covering Donald Trump from now and for the next 4 years, I know Jamie, your wife, has spoken very eloquently about this recently, but for Jonathan, for you and for Anne and whomever else wants to, how do journalists cover Trump given the new state of play that we're in with
Thank
what
you.
he says.
And this will be the last one here. The lady's been waiting. Yeah.
I was just wondering how the panel think that Trump will affect Cuban-US relations. Thank you.
Okay, very specific. Thank you, all of you. I'm sorry, people I couldn't get to. We are almost running out of time, so we're going to, this is to all of the panel and our people joining us via video link. This is going to be your last sort of go, so this is time to make closing remarks, really. Why don't we hear from you, Philip Bobbitt, if you can still hear us, this really specific question about this, the Trump's business interests, and if you could unpack for us what the charge against him is in terms of the Constitution and how this might affect the Electoral College. And it's a bit arcane, but I think it's worth explaining. So could you just walk us through that? Oh, no. Oh, that's such a shame. Slight gloating look on Steve Hilton's face, I think.
No, I'm not.
I think he's gloating. Or maybe he's lost his microphone as well. Okay, well, is there anyone here who could have done the point about emoluments and the Electoral College?
I
Anne
can help a little bit.
And so sorry to Philip Bobbitt. Anne Applebaum,
So
go on.
I am not a constitutional lawyer, but there is a clause in the Constitution that says a president cannot accept emoluments from foreign sources. So essentially any kind of payment that comes to Donald Trump through his company that comes from abroad theoretically can be construed as a bribe or as an attempt to influence the President of the United States one way or the other.
And it would take an act of Congress, by the way, to prove that emolument. And
okay.
that's not going to happen. It's a non-issue.
So I'm sorry that Philip Bobbitt can't be more precise than I can. I think there's actually a deeper and broader issue, and I was trying to find a place to bring this up before, which is whether or not it's constitutional, there is a profound moral problem with the fact that Trump has not revealed his income taxes. We don't know who owns his companies. I am told, and I do not have proof, and you'll be in this, it's a post-true society, but I would like to say, that here I don't know, I don't have the proof. I'm not going to claim something I don't know. I have been told that there is, for example, massive Russian investment in his buildings in the United States, that many of the apartments there have been built by...
You can do better, I think. You can do better. Deutsche Bank.
His son has said so.
His son said
You don't believe his son?
Yeah.
You don't believe him?
Russians have invested in some of his properties.
Sorry?
That's it.
Sorry?
Russians have invested in some of his properties. So have just
right,
about everyone else.
That's what I just said.
Yeah.
But Ted, you've got...
No, that's what I just said. So all I'm saying is he is somebody who is...
Who invested in the Clinton Foundation?
Doesn't matter anymore.
It doesn't matter anymore.
No. She's not president.
We noticed.
She's not president. So, I'm sorry. This is going to be an issue that is going to be on the front pages every single day until he either makes his companies transparent, puts his companies into a blind trust, not run by his children, run by somebody completely different, cuts himself off totally so that he can prove that he is not being influenced by people who invest in his companies. I don't know if he's going to do that. I've so far seen no signs of it. But this will be an issue every single day for the next 4 years.
He did announce that he started the legal paperwork in December 15th, I think.
Great. He's announced it. He still hasn't said what that means. He hasn't indicated that his children won't be involved. He hasn't cut himself off from his companies yet. When he does it, we can talk about that, but he has not done it.
Thank you. Mary DeJesse, well, how should journalists cover Donald Trump?
I think they should cover Donald Trump exactly the same way they cover everybody else. I mean, I don't see that there is an issue here. You report what people say. If you're a commentator, you can say you disapprove, you don't believe it, or you think it's absolutely wonderful.
And
if
should
you're
they
a
say whether
reporter,
it's true or not? What if he lies? We haven't had a president who aggressively lies every day on Twitter before.
We have for 8 years.
No.
I don't think we didn't hear Ted. Hang on, we didn't hear Ted Malloch's response.
I said we've had a president that has lied every day on Twitter for 8 years. So
you think Obama's lied every day?
Absolutely.
Oh God!
And can you
I
give
know
us an
he's a
example?
great favorite in London.
Can you give an example of a lie that he's told on Twitter?
He came over here and tried to get people to vote against Brexit.
You said he lied there.
Yeah. That's not a lie.
That's not a lie. That's an argument. I mean, that isn't. Urging people to vote one way on Brexit may be unwise. It wasn't untrue.
It wasn't untrue?
Well, no. He offered an opinion. How is that? I don't know how that could be untrue. He was just saying, this is what I think.
Just move on.
Okay.
It's ridiculous.
Jamie, do you want to respond to how journalists should cover Trump?
I'm going to answer it in a slightly different way, as I think people will be interested, not that the Democrats are very important anymore. The Clinton administration is never going to be. You don't have to worry about the Clinton Foundation. You don't have to worry about all the stuff related to Hillary. But there are some Democrats left, a few in the House, a few in the Senate, in the minority. And I think there is going to be a real challenge to figure out how to deal with a president of the kind that we've mentioned. And so I'm going to make a suggestion, which I'm going to try to hold to. By the time that Donald Trump becomes president, and I'm going to give myself another month and a half to focus only on policy. It's going to be the hardest thing in the world to do, but I think that Democrats would be wise to disagree as aggressively as they see necessary and focus on the policy they disagree with and put aside. I was quite impressed with the piece from an Italian during the Berlusconi era who said that the opposition lost a lot of value by spending all their time talking about Berlusconi's individually. I think Donald Trump's behavior so far is far in excess of Berlusconi, so I'm going to enjoy for another month saying what I really believe. For example, that he lied to the American people yesterday about the votes, and then used a McCarthyite tactic to demand that the other side prove that what he said isn't true. That's when Joe McCarthy had his list of 45 communists in the State Department, and then he asked them to prove it's not true after he invented the 45.
Okay.
And just one point on Iran. I know you don't like the agreement, but some people like the agreement. The Congress didn't stop it. They weren't able to. So far, the Iran agreement has been pretty successful. Iran is...
Oh, you're kidding.
Let me just get my point out. So far, they have limited their enrichment of uranium, which was the purpose of it. And the 150 billion...
All right. We did hear. We heard you before.
It's a moot point anyway,
And
because the deal will be undone.
I'll make you a side bet that Donald Trump keeps the bulk of the Iran agreement.
Oh, I'll make that bet any day.
All right, I got a side bet with you.
Mary agrees.
And by the way, I think illegal immigration is illegal.
Okay, we're mopping up a lot of points. Just let's close up a few of these points. Just on because the questioner there, I did ask about the Iran deal, and also there was somebody else who asked about the Cuban deal. To what extent do you think Trump is going to row back those Obama deals and agreements?
Well,
you just addressed the Iran one.
If you look at the so-called Gettysburg Address, where he promised to do 28 things, he's going to do all 28 of those things. Donald Trump is not a politician. Now he's an elected politician. He's a builder. He's going to do everything he said he would do because he delivers on what he says he will do. And one of those will be actually to roll back regulation, but it certainly will be, as he said in the Cuban instance, to roll back some of what Obama started.
Some of what? So we're not going to go back to where we were in terms of Cuban-US relations?
Well, we'll see where we go. It depends what Cuba's willing to do itself.
Mary.
This is probably the one point on which the pair of us disagree. I think Cuba is the perfect opportunity for President Trump. I think it's going to play to all his strengths, and he may verbally roll back a little bit, but I think the temptation to go into league with Cuba, for the US under President Trump to invest in Cuba enormously, to try and bring it up to standard, Cuba is the perfect example, and I think President Trump will be the perfect head of the US state to do it.
Stacey Hilliard, I'm going to let you close out with this thought, unless we can still hear. Is Steve Hilton able to hear us?
Yes.
Steve
I'm
Hilton.
sure you've got Phil Bobbitt.
But can we hear him? Can we hear him? That's the question. Steve, can we hear you?
I can hear you.
Good. Okay. So very quickly, Steve, you were asked about the various hate speech that the questioner said the president-elect is guilty of on Twitter, and you were asked as somebody who's been supporting him. Specifically, the question was directed to you. How can you defend it? Just as brief as you can, because we're in our last 90 seconds.
Yeah, okay. I think that question was in response to the discussion that Jamie raised about the accusations of voting irregularity and the exchange with CNN. Now, you may say that what he said about millions of people voting illegally was crazy or laughable or wrong, but it's not hate speech. And I think that the real point here on Trump's behavior is that it would be great if we could have a president who was both dignified and effective. But actually what we've seen over the last 8 years, and likely to see in the next 4 or 8 years, is that I'm afraid that's not on offer. We've had a president in Obama who's been extremely dignified, conducted himself beautifully, uses words beautifully, but I'm afraid, and in terms of the economy at home, has not been effective. He's delivered stagnation, and internationally has projected weakness abroad, including encouraging the adventurism of Putin. And looking forward, I think given the state of the US economy and people's living standards, and the state of the world and the threats we face from terrorism and elsewhere, I fear that we're going to have to take effectiveness over a dignified president, and I think that's the right choice to make.
Thank you, very concise. Closing last word to you, Stacey Hilliard.
I just wanted to go back a little bit about the comments about Trump on Twitter and what it's actually normalized. I think we do have to take what he says on Twitter seriously. He is the president of the United States or president-elect, and when he becomes president, that is going to have influence, whether it's on markets, whether it's on trade, whether it's on foreign relations. And I think that that's something that he will have to learn. And unfortunately, I don't like my president being an apprentice in the job, but I think that he will see the realities that he's facing. And everybody who's come into the presidency, nobody's been president before unless you've come in on a second term. They're faced with realities. They see how difficult it is. For him to deliver on all 28 things, I don't think that's going to be possible when he sees how difficult that becomes.
Okay, well, thank you for that closing word. Thanks to all of you for really engaged and spirited debate. Ah, are we back? Right. This is going to be the closing word.
Oh, really?
You've got a big following here. Closing word to you, Philip Bobbitt, because you've got a very big devoted following here.
Well, thank you. I really apologize for all my technical incompetence. I think that Jamie Rubin really said much of what I would say. We have a system of checks and balances. That system depends most heavily on the Congress, not on the president. But you will have substantial majorities in the House and in the Senate behind a program that I think Donald Trump will eventually endorse. So I would expect to see real challenges for the Democratic Party to keep our eyes on a constitutional and programmatic basis, and to leave some of the things about Donald Trump, which have, I must confess, really irritated me and turned me off, to put those to one side. If we don't organize that way, then I'm afraid the public will decide that we're just as hopeless as the Republicans are.
With that closing word, thank you very much for that. I was going to say two last things. First, I was going to take up the questioner's suggestion that we all gather here again in 4 years' time. They also suggested 8 years, but let's wait and see for that. But I think we'll all agree to that. And lastly, I think you're just going to want to join me in thanking this terrifically engaged and spirited panel: Anne Applebaum, James Rubin, Stacey Hilliard, Mary Dejevsky, Ted Malloch, Steve Hilton, and Philip Bobbitt. Thank you all very much. Thank you.